Imagine yourself waking up on the packed earth floor of a roundhouse. The light is faint, just a soft, bluish haze filtering through smoke holes in the thatched roof. The air smells of damp reeds, sour milk, and the soot of last night's fire. The fire itself, banked beneath ash, has nearly gone out. You'll need to coax it back before the chill bites too deep. Your sleeping mat is made of woven straw. It's itchy, it's cold, and it's slightly damp from last night's rain, which seeped through the wall, because the wall is made of mud, packed around sticks. It's always slightly damp. Everything is. You're in a small, clustered settlement. Maybe 30 people live here, surrounded by rough pasture and thin forest. The buildings are low and round, huddled together against the wind. There are no windows, no insulation. The seasons come in through the walls. You can hear the goats outside, bleating softly, impatiently. They need to be led to grazing. The chickens are already scratching around for beetles in the muddy yard. There is no privacy. Not now, not ever. You share this space with your family, and often with animals. Everyone can see you, smell you, and hear you, all the time. The rhythm of your day is not yours. It belongs to the animals, to the weather, to the firewood supply, and to the moods of those around you. First, there is water. It's not from a tap, of course. You walk down to the stream with 2 clay pots, balancing one on your hip, the other against your thigh. The path is slippery. You've walked it every day of your life. The stream is cold and clouded with silt. The pots are heavy on the return. If you spill even a little, you'll have to go again. There's never enough for comfort, just enough to cook, to rinse, to survive. Then the chores begin. You sweep ash from the hearth. You shape dough from barley flour, coarse and grey. If there's honey, it's precious. Most days there isn't. You may have dried fruit, nuts, or thin gruel, and then comes repair. There is always something to mend. Clay pots crack, roof thatch slips, walls crumble when the rains are heavy. You gather reeds, patch holes, rebind joints with strips of rawhide or sinew. The tools you use are made of wood, stone, and, if you're lucky, bronze. But bronze is rare. Bronze is power. Most of what you touch is brittle and blunted. A bronze blade might pass through the village just a few times a year. Your clothing is simple and coarse. Linen or wool, if you're fortunate, woven thickly but never soft, dyed perhaps with crushed berries or bark, but mostly left natural. You tie it at the waist. You wear shoes only when necessary, made of hide, wrapped and tied with soles that wear through in weeks. The weather dictates the rest. In spring, you plant spelt, barley, beans. In summer, you weed. In autumn, you harvest, dry, store. In winter, you huddle. Food runs low, illness spreads. The fire is everything. Time passes not by clock, but by tasks. What must be done before the sun sets? What must be finished before the rains come? There are no books, no written lists, no maps, no stories on a shelf. What you know is told, shown, repeated. The elders teach by doing, and if they pass, the knowledge sometimes passes with them. And then there's sleep, if it comes. You lie down again on the same straw mat, the embers fading, the animals shifting nearby. Your muscles ache. There is smoke in your throat, and you listen for wolves, for weather, for whatever might be coming in the night. This life is not dramatic. It is not romantic. It is work, breath, sleep, repeat. It is humble, cyclical, and utterly without pause. A constant struggle, a quiet persistence, the rhythm of survival. Now let us leave the warm smoke of the village behind and climb into the silence of the mountains. Higher, colder, thinner air. The sounds of the forest have faded, and all that remains is wind, stone, and the steady crunch of footfalls over frost-rimmed ground. You're now in the Alps, over 5,000 years ago. Not in a settlement, not in a field, but in the margins of the world, where trees begin to vanish and snow clings to the earth even in late spring. Here walked a man, alone. We call him Ötzi. Discovered in 1991 by two hikers, his body lay preserved in ice near the modern-day border between Austria and Italy. But his story begins long before that. Before preservation, before death, before betrayal. Tonight, we don't just look at the mummy. We walk slowly through the footsteps he left behind. His life, Ötzi, lived in the Copper Age, a time when metal was precious, handmade, and reserved for those with skill or status. He was not a king, not a priest, but he was something more than ordinary. His possessions tell the tale. He carried a finely crafted copper axe, its blade cast with care, its edge carefully sharpened. Not many people in his community would have had such a tool. To own one was a mark of value and perhaps of power. He wore a complex set of layered clothing, goat-hide leggings, grass-woven cloak, bearskin cap, leather shoes packed with moss for insulation. Each piece functional, each one sewn with sinew, each one built for survival. He had a quiver of arrows, some finished, some still being fletched. He carried a longbow, unfinished as well, its curved yew wood waiting for the final tensioning. He had a fire-starting kit including flint, dry fungus, and pyrite for sparks. And he had berries in his pouch, meat in his stomach, grains in his teeth. His last meal, carefully reconstructed, included red deer and ibex. He was well-fed, prepared, and moving with purpose. But toward what? Or from what? His death. Here the story turns. Ötzi did not die of cold. He did not starve. He was killed. The evidence is quiet but clear. There's an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder, a sharp blow to the head. No signs of healing, no signs of mercy. His possessions, surprisingly, were left behind. His copper axe, his bow, even his coat, they were not stolen. Why? Some suggest he was ambushed. Others believe it was revenge, perhaps even ritual. We cannot know. But what we do see with patient observation is that Ötzi's death was sudden, intentional, and far from help. He collapsed near the ridge of a glacier, bled into the snow and froze, his body gradually covered by the movements of wind and ice. His skin dried, his organs shrank, but he did not rot. He waited, wrapped in silence. For 5,000 years. His story, retold Ötzi's rediscovery, opened a window into a world before writing, before monuments, before clear lines of inheritance. Scientists examined the pollen in his clothing, the wear on his teeth, the cut marks on his bones. They traced the source of his copper to Tuscan ore, far to the south. They mapped his final steps through the Alps, using plant traces on his shoes and stomach. They found tattoos, over 60 of them, dot patterns and lines, perhaps used for pain relief, or perhaps for something more symbolic. He had arthritis in his joints, worms in his gut, wounds that never healed. He walked a path of chronic discomfort. Was he a herder, a hunter, a smuggler, a chieftain? We don't know. But we do know he had enemies. And we know he walked into the high, cold quiet, not just to survive, but perhaps to escape. His life ended in solitude, but it continues in museums, in journals, in documentaries, in the thousands of eyes that have looked upon his face, so well preserved, so human. Even across millennia, we see ourselves. The ache of cold, the bite of betrayal, the tools we carry, the things we leave behind. And now, let's stay among the ice a little longer. Not with Ötzi alone, but with what else the glaciers have hidden and slowly returned. The cold is patient. Where humans forget, where wood decays and stone sinks into soil, the ice remembers. Trapped beneath layers of snow, glaciers in the high Alps have guarded countless forgotten things, not just Ötzi, but remnants of lives less well preserved. Quiet things, small things, things that were dropped, abandoned, or buried in haste. And now, as the climate shifts and the ice retreats, the mountains are beginning to speak again. This is not a story of sudden discovery. It is a slow unfolding, a drift of history from frost to light. Let us explore what the glaciers have revealed. Tools of lost travelers. Imagine walking a high ridge above the tree line, rock underfoot, cloud above, nothing green in sight. A place with no permanent settlements. Yet archaeologists have found artifacts here far from where people lived. A wooden ice axe, its blade worn from use, perhaps carried by a mountain herder. A fragment of a ski, shaped from birch, dating to thousands of years ago. A child's shoe, barely 4 inches long, hardened by centuries of ice. These were not ceremonial objects. These were practical things, dropped or buried on journeys, on trading missions, seasonal migrations, or perhaps escape routes through hostile land, lost in haste, preserved by accident. Each item speaks softly of movement, of human passage across inhospitable terrain, and of those who never returned to claim what they left behind. The fungi and fibers of survival. Among the more unusual finds have been carefully preserved organic materials, mosses packed into footwear for insulation, or bundles of bark twisted into cords. In Ötzi's own pouch, researchers discovered birch polypore fungus, fungi known for their antibacterial properties. These weren't simply for food or fire, they were medicine carried with intent. Other finds include pieces of bast rope, woven from tree fibers, used for binding or carrying. Wickerwork baskets, their weave patterns still visible. Carefully made, carried into the mountains, and forgotten. Preserved in ice, these delicate items survive where no parchment or inscription could. They give texture to the past. Not just warriors and kings, but practical lives. Those who wove, packed, and planned, far from the comforts of the village. Traces of hidden trade routes. As researchers studied where these objects emerged, patterns began to appear, paths across the Alps, repeated trails used for travel, commerce, and seasonal movement. Long before modern roads, humans used these corridors to carry goods, copper from southern mines, salt from the north, animal hides, herbs and honey. Nothing left clear marks, no buildings, no maps. But the trail is there, drawn in buttons, fragments of cloth, bits of food and ash, scattered like breadcrumbs across centuries. In the Schneiderjoch Pass, for example, artifacts have been found from over 6,000 years ago, including a wooden bow fragment, leather string, and a yew branch stripped of bark. These weren't just hikers, these were equipped travelers, perhaps traders, perhaps messengers, perhaps smugglers. The passes once believed to be impassable were, in truth, highways, quiet, cold ones, traveled in spring and autumn, watched only by the wind. Intimate reminders. Some of the most moving finds are the most personal. A single leather glove, its stitching still tight. A belt buckle carved from antler, a piece of felted wool dyed with plant pigment. These are not the remnants of kings or monuments, but of individuals. Each item lost once in silence, each rediscovered in melting ice. And as glaciers shrink with each passing year, archaeologists rush, not to dig, but to watch, to scan, to collect, to preserve what appears, as the ice gives up its secrets one by one. For a world so ancient, this is a race against time. But for us, tonight, it is a gentle invitation to pause, to imagine the sound of snow under ancient sandals, to feel the weight of a pack made of hide and bark, to see behind the museum glass the shadow of a person who once lived and walked and breathed this thin, cold air. Now, as the final mist of the glacier drifts away, we descend once more, back to the warmth of firelight and the structure of early society. The mountain fades behind us now. We return to the valleys, to the clustered homes behind earthen walls, to the low crackle of firewood and the clatter of grinding stones. But this time, we aren't stepping into the mud-walled huts of the poor. We are looking upward toward those who sat slightly apart, slightly above, those whose huts were bigger, whose hands were cleaner, whose power, though subtle, shaped the rhythms of Bronze Age village life. Tonight, let us meet the chiefs and traders, the bronze elite, and discover what power looked like long before palaces and thrones. The meaning of metal. In a Bronze Age world, wealth didn't come in coins or castles, it came in metal, and metal was rare. Copper had to be mined, smelted, cast and shaped. It was labor-intensive, dangerous, and dependent on knowledge passed down through generations. Tin, even rarer, had to be brought from distant lands. Combine them, and you had bronze, stronger, sharper, more durable. To own a bronze axe, a bronze knife, a decorated pin, it meant you were someone. Someone with access, someone with alliances, someone who could afford not just the object, but the people who made it. Metals weren't just tools, they were symbols of status, of lineage, of connection to the outside world. A chief might not swing his own axe, but the gleam of it at his belt told others who he was. Feasts and favor. Imagine a gathering at dusk. A large open space in the center of the village. Fires burning low. People seated on hides or woven mats. Children watching from the shadows. Into the circle steps a man, broad-shouldered, dressed in finely trimmed hide, his neck adorned with an amber bead. He raises a bowl of barley beer. Meat is served on wooden platters. Songs begin. This is not just a party. It is a performance of power. Feasting was one of the chief's primary tools, not just to celebrate, but to bind loyalty, to show he could provide, share, and command abundance. Guests came not only to eat, but to affirm bonds of trust, to remember past favors, to pledge future ones. In a world without written contracts, this was politics. Power didn't need a palace, it needed a generous table. Long-distance networks. While most villagers rarely left their home valleys, the elite, especially traders and chiefs, had longer horizons. They knew the sources of tin far to the west. They knew the coastal people who gathered amber from the Baltic shore. They knew how to move goods across dangerous terrain, through forests and rivers, avoiding rival groups. Amber beads found in graves hundreds of miles from the sea. Glass imitations made to mimic the real thing. Daggers cast from southern oars. These are signs of a world more connected than we often imagine. Trade routes existed, not paved, not official, but traveled by those who could negotiate, navigate, and protect their goods. The Bronze Age elite were not only rich, they were well-informed. And in a time when knowledge traveled with people, this was as valuable as any treasure. A different kind of daily life. Let's walk now into a large hut near the edge of a village. Unlike the others, its roof is tall, its hearth is wide, decorative carvings adorn the doorframe. Inside there is a sense of stillness. The air smells of preserved herbs and well-tanned leather. A wooden bed frame draped in furs stands against the far wall. A loom leans silently nearby, its weavings more intricate than those in poorer homes. The elite did not live in luxury as we'd think of it. They still rose with the sun, still dealt with smoke and hunger and lice, but their lives were slightly removed from survival. They had more time, more choices, more protection. Their children were better fed, their hands less calloused, their stories longer, more storied, and when they died, their graves reflected that, buried with daggers, beads, and sometimes even the skulls of cattle. Signs of wealth meant to follow them into the unknown, returning to the present, and so as our final ember glows low, we return slowly, gently, to where we began. From muddy huts to icy ridges, from fungus pouches to amber beads, we've walked through the slow, quiet churn of Bronze Age life. A life ruled not by spectacle, but by routine, by survival, by subtle signs of status and power. Tonight, you've shared a long story, not of great empires or famous battles, but of villagers who shaped the world one bowl of porridge, one stone wall, one trade bead at a time. Let's settle now and rest. Imagine this. You've been walking all morning through dusty streets. The sun is high and your tunic clings slightly with sweat. The smells of the city are sharp and earthy, roasted meat, crushed olives, wet stone, and something less pleasant rising from the gutters. You're headed toward the Thermae, the Roman public bathhouse, not for relaxation, but because it's expected. It's part of your daily rhythm, part hygiene, part habit, part social obligation. You arrive at the entrance, a heavy archway carved with decorative reliefs, perhaps dolphins, shells, or Neptune's trident. You pay a small fee to the attendant and step inside, into a space that is dim but warm. There are voices echoing off the stone walls, laughter, shouting, hushed negotiations. You pass into the apoditerium, the changing room. There are benches here and niches in the wall to place your clothes, but no locks, no privacy. A slave boy might be watching your belongings or not. Pickpockets are common. As you strip down, you keep one eye on your cloak. Now you are nearly naked, except perhaps for thin sandals and a small cloth. Your body is exposed, not just to the heat, but to the glances and judgments of others. You carry your strigil, a curved metal scraper used to remove sweat and oil, and walk toward the tepidarium, the warm room. The floor is heated from below by a clever system of bricks and fire. The air is damp. There is condensation on the walls. People sit in small groups, rubbing their limbs with oil, stretching their muscles, or simply sweating in silence. You take a seat. The bench is slick. Beside you, an older man begins talking loudly about politics. A younger one complains about the price of fish. Two teenage boys are wrestling. A senator enters and is immediately surrounded by flatterers. Then it's time for the caldarium, the hot room. It hits you like a wall. The heat is intense, enveloping, pressing into your skin. The floor is scorching, and you step carefully. A large basin of hot water steams in the center. People stand beside it, scraping oil from their bodies with their strigils, sometimes grunting from the effort. You try it yourself, rubbing oil into your skin to loosen the dirt, then scraping it off in long strokes. It's not comfortable, it's not gentle. It is, however, necessary. Your breathing becomes shallow. The heat is almost too much. The steam makes it hard to see. You feel faint. And just when it's almost unbearable, you move into the frigidarium, the cold room. The shock of the cool air tightens your skin. You lower yourself slowly into a cold plunge pool. The water bites, then numbs. Around you, people gasp, laugh, or curse softly. You don't linger. Your fingers start to tingle. And now, the final rituals. You return to the apoditerium, hoping your clothes are still there. They are. Mostly dry. You towel off with a coarse linen cloth. Someone offers you a dab of perfumed oil, which you accept. It helps a little. Outside, the sun is lower and your muscles are sore. Your skin is clean, scraped and pink. But are you relaxed? Not exactly. You feel exposed, strained, a little judged, a little overwhelmed. This was never about pampering. It was about routine, expectation, endurance, and you've made it through. Just one day. In a Roman bathhouse. Now that you've washed the dust of the city from your skin, let's stay in the world of Roman bodies. Only now, we'll step into the quieter, more contemplative chambers of learning and medicine. Imagine yourself in a large room lit by oil lamps, the flame flickering softly against plastered walls painted with delicate scenes, grapevines, birds in flight, gods with calm faces. The scent of beeswax and dried herbs fills the air. Scrolls rest on shelves. Instruments of strange shape lie on a polished table. Small bronze tools, glass flasks, and the curved scalpel of an age before anesthesia. This is the world of Galen of Pergamon, perhaps the most influential physician in Roman history, a man of intellect, of curiosity and of contradictions, a man whose theories would shape Western medicine for well over 1,000 years, sometimes helpfully, sometimes harmfully. But who was he? And what was it like to be a doctor in a world without germ theory, antibiotics, or even the concept of sterile surgery? Let us walk quietly into his life. A childhood among temples. Galen was born around the year 129 CE in the wealthy Greek city of Pergamon, nestled in what is now Western Turkey. His father was a prosperous architect with a love for mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy. His mother, as Galen described her rather coldly, was often angry and sharp-tongued. Pergamon was known for its great Asclepieion, a healing temple dedicated to the god Asclepius. Sick people came from far away to sleep in its sacred spaces, hoping for divine dreams that would guide their treatment. Young Galen would have wandered those temple grounds, listening to murmured prayers and ritual chants. He would have seen snakes gliding through the colonnades, sacred creatures of healing. He would have smelled the incense, watched the priests perform their rites, and wondered where divine magic ended and natural knowledge began. His father, ambitious for him, gave him a rich education in philosophy, science, and medicine. And when Galen was just 16, he began his formal medical training. Learning across the world. He did not stay long in Pergamon. Galen, like many great thinkers of his age, became a traveler. He journeyed through the eastern parts of the Roman Empire, Smyrna, Corinth, and eventually Alexandria, the shining center of ancient knowledge. There, amid the vast library and bustling port, he studied anatomy by observing dissections, mostly of animals since human dissection was illegal. He watched the pulse in frogs, the muscles in monkeys, the arteries of pigs. He learned how to bind wounds, to open up the body, to examine its humors and organs, even though he had never seen the insides of a human being. And all the while, he studied the theories of earlier Greek physicians, Hippocrates, of course, and also Herophilos and Erasistratus. He drank deeply from the old scrolls, but he never accepted them blindly. He argued, he experimented, he observed. The physician of gladiators. In his early 30s, Galen returned to Pergamon and was appointed physician to the city's gladiators. This was not a job for the faint of heart. Gladiators were expensive. Their injuries, often severe, needed rapid and effective treatment. A misjudgment could cost a patron a fortune. Here Galen honed his skills, not just in theory but in practice. He set bones, stitched wounds, treated fevers. He saw the human body torn open, exposed and suffering, and he learned. He observed how tendons connected to muscle, how the nerves seemed to communicate sensation, how the pulse changed with emotion, and soon his fame spread far beyond Pergamon. Summoned to Rome. Rome, of course, was the heart of the empire, and eventually it called to Galen. By the late 150s CE, he had arrived in the capital, bringing with him not just skill, but confidence. Galen was never humble. He believed he was right, and often he was. In Rome, he treated the rich and powerful. His writings tell of treating emperors, philosophers, generals. He once saved a senator's life with a potion of boiled apples. Another time, he diagnosed a woman's illness by reading her pulse, a method that would later inspire centuries of romanticized diagnosis. Eventually, he became the personal physician to the young Emperor Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius. His position was now secure, but Galen didn't stop working. His theories and legacy. Galen was a prolific writer. He wrote over 500 medical texts, of which dozens survive. His style was systematic, logical, and full of examples drawn from both experience and classical philosophy. His greatest belief was in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each person's health, he thought, was determined by the balance of these humors. Illness and imbalance, treatment, restore harmony. If someone was feverish and flushed, they had too much blood. A cold compress or even bloodletting might help. If someone was melancholic and quiet, perhaps their black bile was in excess. A calming tea, a different diet, perhaps a change of scenery. By today's standards, these ideas were mistaken, but in Galen's time, they offered structure, meaning. a way to understand the chaotic world of sickness and pain. And in a world without microscopes or vaccines, they were deeply reassuring. A quiet influence, Galen died sometime in the early 200s CE, likely in Rome. He left no school, no family, no dramatic tomb. And yet, his influence endured for over 1,000 years. Through the Middle Ages, his writings were copied, revered, and quoted. Islamic scholars preserved them, translated them, built upon them. In medieval Europe, to question Galen was to risk being labeled a fool, or worse, a heretic. Even well into the Renaissance, Galen's shadow lingered in lecture halls and apothecaries. And now, as the lamps burn low in Galen's study, let us step quietly away. Let the scrolls roll shut. Let the surgical tools be cleaned and stored. Let the pulse slow, the breathing soften. You have walked with a man who sought to understand the body, not by magic, but by thought. You have seen medicine born not of labs and microscopes, but of logic and ritual, of trial, error, and the slow unfolding of knowledge. Galen may not have been right about everything, but his questions still echo, and in the stillness of night, you may find a little comfort in that.
Now that we have left the oil-scented stillness of Galen's study, let us move downward beneath the stone floors and bustling markets into the damp, forgotten places of the city. Imagine yourself walking along a narrow corridor, your steps muffled by layers of silt and thyme. The air is thick, not with smoke or incense, but with the heavy scent of damp limestone, ancient moisture, and something more earthy, more human. You are in the Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest structures in Rome, a marvel of engineering built, not for triumph, but for function, for the quiet, steady work of moving what was no longer wanted. The Romans built sewers, and those sewers, in turn, preserved the most intimate remnants of life. Let us explore, not in haste or alarm, but slowly, thoughtfully, what archaeologists have found in these places and what stories lie buried in the waste of empire. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's grand drain. The Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer, began as a canal in the 6th century BC. It drained the marshlands between Rome's hills, turning a swampy floodplain into the Forum, the heart of Roman public life. Over time, it grew. As Rome expanded, the sewer system became more elaborate, covered, redirected, joined to public latrines and street drains. The city's filth, rainwater, urine, kitchen waste, chamber pots, the runoff from baths and fountains all flowed into the Tiber River. It was not a glamorous system, and yet the Romans were proud of it. Pliny the Elder, the great naturalist, wrote of it admiringly, and even emperors, in their vast palaces, knew that the city beneath them flushed with an intricate rhythm. What the sewers kept: layers of forgotten life. Centuries passed, the empire fell, cities rose and fell atop old stones, and all the while, in the quiet, sealed darkness of buried sewers and cesspits, things remained. When archaeologists began to excavate these ancient channels, often kneed in mud and clay, they did not find gold. They did not find weapons. They found poop. And that, it turned out, was far more interesting. In places like Herculaneum, Ostia, and the Roman latrines of York, archaeologists recovered the contents of ancient toilets. What they found has become one of the most detailed records of Roman daily life. Here's what lay within those deposits: olive pits, often whole, suggesting olives were eaten quickly and in quantity; grain husks, likely from bread made of rough, coarse flour; fish bones, and sometimes entire preserved anchovies, evidence of fermented fish sauces like garum; figs, dates, and nuts, often in partially digested form; traces of parasites, roundworm and whipworm eggs suggesting common, chronic infections; and occasionally the remains of textile fibers or powdered minerals, perhaps from cleaning clothes or makeup. One pit, unearthed in a Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall, revealed over 100 wooden tablets, letters from soldiers, jokes between colleagues, shopping lists, and one memorable complaint about cold socks. So, from what the Romans flushed away, we learn what they ate, how they suffered, what they missed, what they loved. Roman toilets, a communal experience. Now picture a Roman public toilet, not a private, silent stall, but a long marble bench with holes cut at regular intervals. Beneath it, Running water carried waste into the sewer system. No walls, no dividers, just conversation, gossip, and the unmistakable echo of shared humanity. To clean oneself, there was no paper. Instead, a sponge on a stick, rinsed in vinegar water and shared among users. It was, in its way, efficient, practical, perhaps not quite hygienic by modern standards, but for its time, surprisingly advanced. Roman engineers even built ventilation systems to reduce odor and pressure. Some latrines were connected to running fountains, offering cool water to rinse hands or feet, or tools. This mix of functionality and ritual, of engineering and communal experience, defined much of Roman public life. Microscopic histories, modern archaeologists and bioarchaeologists now use microscopes to study ancient waste. They analyze pollen grains to identify plants used in cooking. They examine DNA from gut bacteria to understand ancient digestion and disease. They look for chemical traces of spices, herbs, or even drugs, opium residue, cannabis particles, and traces of wine preserved in the darkness for centuries. Each sewer becomes a time capsule, not of the grand or the heroic, but of the ordinary. It tells us what people ate, what they suffered from, how often they washed, how their guts responded to their environment. In a way, it tells us who they were quietly, honestly, and without adornment. Trash heaps as historical gold mines outside city walls, in ancient middens, waste piles and Dumsey searchers have found entire worlds of knowledge. From layers of pottery shards and broken tiles, we learn about trade routes and manufacturing. From bones and shells, we learn about diets and rituals. From discarded jewelry, children's toys, and broken tools, we glimpse moments of carelessness, frustration, and change. The beauty of trash in archaeology is that it is accidental. It is not curated, not stylized. It reveals what people used, not what they wanted to be remembered for. A gentle ending. So now, let us ascend quietly, leaving the stone-walled sewers behind. Let us rise from the soil, stepping softly past the broken olive pits and fig stems, the crushed seeds and quiet bones of forgotten meals. Let the whispers of ancient latrines fade. Let the scent of damp clay drift away. You now know a little more of Rome, not through its emperors or its temples, but through its waste, through the things left behind, and somehow, through these remains, the past speaks more clearly. Imagine yourself walking on polished mosaic floors, the tiles cool beneath your bare feet. A gentle wind carries the scent of laurel and lemon blossoms through the open courtyard. Sunlight dapples the water in the central fountain, and the voices you hear are low and deliberate, measured, refined. You are now in the world of the Roman elite, a world of leisure, patronage, dining, and distinction, a world sustained by networks of slaves, tenants, and cliffs, many of whom lived the daily hardships we've already explored. In this final segment, we drift slowly through the more luxurious side of Roman life, the villas, the banquets, and the intricate social rituals of Rome's upper class. We will not hurry. There is no need. Let's begin. The Roman villa, an engine of prestige. To be wealthy in Rome was not simply to have coinage. Beyond the city walls, Villa Rusticae, country estates owned by senators, equestrians, and old patrician families, dotted the Italian countryside. These were not mere homes. They were symbols of status and control. Some were simple farmhouses, others sprawled across hillsides with colonnaded gardens, heated baths, and private libraries filled with scrolls. The larger ones functioned like small economic empires, overseeing vineyards, olive groves, and herds of livestock. Imagine a typical day here. You might be greeted by your steward in the atrium. He recites the harvest reports. Then you stroll through your portico with a cup of watered wine, stopping to pluck a fig from your own orchard. There is no urgency, no jostling crowds, just the gentle rhythm of oversight and leisure. The banquet, food as a stage. To eat in public at a tavern or market stall was often considered beneath the dignity of Rome. Instead, the elite hosted convivia, formal banquets, often reclining on couches arranged in a dining was both a pleasure and a performance. You would not sit upright, but rather lounge on your side, supported by a cushion, as slaves served dish after dish, oysters from the Bay of Naples, dormice stuffed with herbs and honey, peacock eggs, flamingo tongues, and sweet wine thickened with dates. Not all Roman elites ate extravagantly every day. Many prided themselves on austere meals to show discipline, but on occasions, especially during Saturnalia or political gatherings, excess was expected. The point was never just to eat, but to display refinement. The meal was an extension of your identity. Did you serve imported peppercorns, aged Falernian wine, Greek musicians? All of it mattered. And as you dined, you talked of politics, poetry, scandal, and sometimes of philosophy, patronage and power. The dance of status every morning in Rome, beneath the grandeur of elite villas and government buildings, another ritual took place. The clients bore a citizen seeking favors, legal help, or even food would line up at the door of a wealthy patron. In return for their loyalty and votes, they might receive a few coins, a meal, or legal support. This daily exchange of client and patron was the foundation of Roman social structure. It wasn't simply charity, it was a complex, reciprocal bond that tied rich and poor into a shared web of obligation. For the elite, keeping clients was a mark of prestige. For the poor, the system was one of survival. Some patrons prided themselves on their dignity and generosity. Others complained about their clients' demands and lack of refinement. Either way, the ritual continued, year after year. Leisure and letters. Time well spent. Unlike the bustling life of artisans or laborers, Rome's upper classes could afford to be at a law, rather to choose their occupations freely. Many elite Romans spent hours writing letters, composing poetry, or debating ethics in shaded courtyards. Pliny the Younger wrote at length about his villas and daily habits, early walks, light meals, dictation to slaves, and time spent revising. Bathing was another part of daily rhythm. Private baths were common, but even elite men frequented public baths, especially the grand thermae built under emperors like Caracalla and There, amid the hot steam and marble columns, they might discuss literature, business, or plans for an upcoming Senate session. Time flowed differently here, not in toil or strict routine, but in pauses, in intervals, in the slow luxury of deciding how to spend the afternoon. The wider reach, global luxuries, a Roman elite's wealth often stretched beyond Italy. Through the empire's vast trade networks, they could access silk from China, spices from India, ivory and incense from Africa, glassware from Syria, Greek tutors for their children, and Egyptian papyrus for their libraries. Their lives, in many ways, were global, rooted in the estates of Lesham but deeply dependent on conquests, slavery, and long-distance commerce. They read Epicurus, they quoted Virgil, they feared the mobs, bribed officials, adored their gardens, and lived with the quiet certainty of being at the top of a very steep hill, gently closing the curtain. And now, as we step away from these vine-covered villas, from the warm pools and shaded walkways, let us close this chapter gently. We have wandered through many rooms of Roman life, dark taverns, quiet sewers, crowded tenements, and fragrant gardens, through sickness and healing, toil and luxury, silence and laughter. Let the voices of the past recede now, like echoes fading into soft stone. The banquet ends. The lamp is extinguished. You are no longer among the crowds or reclining on cushions. You are here, in stillness, and behind you lies a long, slow journey through mud-brick villages and mountain through Ampharian aqueducts, through smoke and stone and forgotten names. Sleep well. The past is quiet now. Imagine waking to the scent of damp wool and dying embers. It is still dark, utterly dark. The fire in the hearth, though kept alive through the night, has shrunk to a quiet glow beneath the ash. The air is cold and close. There is no privacy here, only proximity. You are a thrall or servant in a Norse household, not a guest, not quite free. The longhouse creaks as it settles, and somewhere a child coughs. A dog shifts in the straw. You sit up slowly, pulling a rough spun blanket around your shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping family just meters away. There are no rooms here, only space divided by status. Your day has begun, and it will not end until darkness falls again. The rhythm of chores. You begin by feeding the fire. Kneeling, you blow gently across the coals, coaxing them to life. Bits of birch bark and splinters catch, and smoke fills the low-bent ceiling. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof above the hearth, where the smoke can drift upward. Slowly, you feed the flames with peat, or maybe driftwood, if you're near the coast. Then you fetch water. The well is outside. The morning frost bites at your fingers, and the bucket is heavier than it looks. You carry it back in silence, careful not to spill. Then the tasks begin in earnest. You may salt fish, you may churn butter, you may scrub the floorboards with bundled straw or boiled grains for the morning meal. The scent of old fish oil lingers in everything, on the tools, on your hands, in your breath. There are goats to milk, nets to repair, ale to brew, bread to knead, and always more wood to split. You might be 13 years old or 60, it hardly matters. You are a body moving through motion. The rhythm of your life is the rhythm of need. The longhouse, warmth and noise. You shared this longhouse with others' family, animals, servants. At the center, the hearth burns all day. Around it, benches line the walls, layered with furs, wool, and stored goods. At night, you lie close to others. There is snoring, coughing, scratching, murmured prayer. You can hear the shifting of dogs, the occasional grunt of a pig kept near the warmth. There is little privacy and no silence. The air is often thick with soot and smoke, clinging to your skin and lungs. Over time, the rafters above blacken, the air tastes of ash. In summer, it is humid and buzzing with flies. In winter, the wind finds every gap between the timbers. You wear layers and still feel cold. And yet, the hearth is the heart of the house. It is where meals are made, where stories are shared, and where life holds together. Meals and hunger you eat after everyone else, usually from a wooden bowl, with your fingers or a spoon carved by hand. A servant's meal is simple barley porridge, sometimes fish or dried meat, if there is enough. Thick stews made from root vegetables, flatbread baked on a stone beside the fire. Spices are rare, salt is precious. Most food is bland, but filling. There is never a feast for you. Those are for the free men, the householders and warriors. You eat quickly and return to work. Life under law in Norse society. Even the lowless people had a place in the legal structure. Thralls were not considered full persons under the law, but their treatment was regulated. A master could be fined for killing a servant unjustly. Children born of free women and thrall men could, in some regions, become free themselves. Manumission freedom was possible. Some servants worked their way out, others were freed as rewards, or sold, or passed on as property. But for most, life was defined by dependence, on the master, on the seasons, on the endurance of the body. Religion and sacrifice, the gods, watched. Even here, servants might join in festivals, though often as workers, preparing food or tending the sacred fire. At times, the line between participant and offering blurred. The Norse sagas, though written down much later, hint that thralls were occasionally sacrificed in religious ceremonies, especially during times of famine or at funerals of great leaders. Whether this was common or rare is hard to say. The archaeological record is quiet on such matters, but the fear would have lingered. Imagine tending the animals outside the longhouse during a festival. You hear the drums, the chant, and you know that the gods are listener and that not all prayers are answered kindly. Seasons and silence through all of it, the noise, the heat, the dark time is slow. In the summer, your days are long and full of tasks. In the winter, you may go days without sunlight. The house becomes a world unto itself. The wind moans beyond the walls, like something alive. Snow gathers at the door. You sleep when you can. You dream of freedom, perhaps, or simply of stillness. And if you are lucky, your body holds out. Your fingers stay whole. Your back remains strong. And you see another spring. A pause before we continue. We'll pause here for a moment. We've walked through the ash-dark rooms of Viking daily life. We've felt the rhythm of labor, the quiet weight of survival, the closeness of smoke and earth. In a moment, we'll rise from the longhouse and step into the wide, windswept world beyond. Our next journey leads far from the servant's bench, across seas and into empires. We'll follow one of the most storied figures in Viking history, Harald Hart, the warrior king whose life was more than myth. But for now, breathe slowly. Let the fire crackle behind your thoughts. Let the fire of history burn low, steady and slow. We turn now to the long, extraordinary journey of Harald Sigurdsson. His story does not begin with glory. It begins with defeat. And like the best Viking sagas, it is filled with exile, gold, betrayal, and destiny. Tonight, we will walk that path, not as warriors ourselves but as quiet observers, step by measured step. Childhood and blood and legacy. Harold was born around the year 1015 into a Norway already gripped by conflict. He was the half-brother of King Olaf II, later known as Saint Olaf, a Christian king trying to unify Norway under his rule while still wrestling with the old gods and the old ways. Harold was barely 15 when he first went to war. The year was 1030. Olaf had returned from exile to reclaim his throne. Harold followed him young, eager, likely together. They marched to the Battle of Stiklestad, one of the most famous battles in Scandinavian history. It ended in ruin. Olaf was killed, Harold was wounded, and the young prince fled vanishing into the smoke of a lost cause, into the folds of legend. Exile and the road east, wounded and defeated. Harold did not return home. Instead, he began a journey that would last over a decade, a journey that took him far beyond the He traveled east enter Kiev and Rus, the powerful federation of Slavic and Norse principalities, ruled by Yaroslav the Wise. Yet Harold served as a mercenary, learning the art of war on the steppes. But this was only the beginning. By the mid-1030s, Harold had moved south, joining the Varangian Guard, the elite Viking unit that protected the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. Imagine it, a tall, scarred Norwegian warrior walking beneath domes of gold, through marble halls lit by oil lamps, from pine forests to palaces. He was no longer a boy fleeing defeat. He was becoming a man of coin and command. In service to Byzantium for nearly 10 years, Harold fought across the empire, in Sicily, against Arab forces, in the Holy Land, possibly as part of an imperial pilgrimage guard, in Bulgaria during bloody uprisings, on the Black Sea, in naval battles. He saw cities burn. He learned Greek. Perhaps he sent gold and songs back to the north. The Byzantine court called him Arolds, and records though sparse had both respect and suspicion. He was rich and dangerous, but Constantinople could never be his home. He eventually escaped the empire, perhaps after a scandal involving imperial inheritance. Perhaps by fleeing with a treasure hoard, he returned north, rich, famous, ready. The road to kingship back in Scandinavia. The political landscape had shifted. Norway was now ruled by Magnus the Good, the son of Saint Olaf, Harold's own nephew. At first, Harold tried diplomacy. He offered Magnus part of his Byzantine gold in exchange for... Perhaps surprisingly, Magnus agreed. Together, they ruled Norway for a time. But when Magnus died suddenly in 1047, Harold became sole king. And now, the warrior became a ruler. The exile became a sovereign, but he would never be a peaceful king. Hardrada, the Iron Ruler. Harold's reign was marked by force. He consolidated power, crushed uprisings, and imposed royal authority with what many later described as harshness. Thus his title Hardrada, Hard Ruler, was earned. He ruled not just with sword and tax, but with image and legend. He commissioned poetry about himself, skaldic verses, that painted him as bold, wise, feared. He wore Eastern silks, used Byzantine tactics, and kept a court filled with both warriors and singers. Norway prospered under him. Trade grew, towns strengthened, but Harold's gaze drifted west, to England, the final campaign. 1066. In the year 1066, Harold Godwinson had just taken the English throne, following the death of Edward the Confessor, but others contested the crown. Among them, Harold had, with an army of seasoned warriors and hundreds of Harold sailed to England believing he had a claim, and that he could take what he deserved. He landed in the north, and for a moment, it worked. He won a fierce victory at the Battle of Fulford near York, but only days later came the end. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson's army struck fast and hard. Harold was unprepared. According to saga tradition, he fought swinging a two-handed sword until he fell, pierced through the throat by an arrow. The last great Viking king died on English soil, not with a whisper but with a roar. Memory and myth. Harold's death marked the end of the Viking Age for many historians. After 1066, England changed. Norway changed. The world of wide-eyed warriors and wandering jarls gave way to cathedrals, kingdoms, and iron law. But Harold lived on in song. Skaldic poems, Norse, sagas, and Icelandic chronicles all preserved his images, both brutal and brilliant, tragic and mighty. He was a servant, a wanderer, a mercenary, a king, and for a brief moment he nearly changed the fate of Europe. A quiet moment before we move on, let us pause here. At the end of an era, you have followed the path of Harold Hardrada from blood-soaked defeat to Byzantine palaces, 2 frozen battlefields under a northern sky. Now, silence settles. The fires are dim, the sea is calm, the warrior sleeps. In our next segment, we will turn from story to mystery, from what was said to what was left behind. We'll explore Viking graves, rituals, and the silent clues left in ship burials and charred bones. But for now, rest your mind. The world turns slowly here. The stories of the Vikings are rich in song and saga, but what of those who left no words behind? Tonight, we walk softly among the graves, not the grand tombs of kings alone, but the humbler plots, the ship-shaped mounds, the ash pits and stone circles scattered across Scandinavia and beyond. From the windswept shores of Norway to the peat bogs of Denmark, from burned boats buried in soil to strange, unsettling arrangements of bone, this is the archaeology of belief, grief, and legacy. We will move slowly, one layer at a time. Ship burials, death by sea and earth. The most iconic Viking burials are those involving ships. In a culture shaped by water, it's no surprise that even in death, a boat could serve as both coffin and shrine. Take the Oseberg ship, discovered in 1904 near the Osselafjord in Norway. Buried around the year 834, this elegant vessel was nearly 70 feet long, carved with curling animal heads and elaborate patterns. But it was not meant for the sea knot anymore. Inside, archaeologists found 2 women buried together with a wealth of goods, carts, textiles, carved sleighs, imported silks, animals, tools, and even a small bucket from the British Isles. Who were they? A queen and her servant, priestesses, powerful landowners? We do not know, but their ship, half vessel, half temple, still speaks. Cremation and ritual burning. Not all Vikings were buried. Many were burned, their bodies consumed in fire, their ashes scattered or buried in urns. Some fires were small, others raged hot enough to melt metal. Bones were cracked and charred. Objects were deliberately destroyed, swords bent, brooches smashed, animal bones mixed in. In Norse belief, the act of burning may have freed the soul, sending it to the afterlife or to Valhalla, the hall of the slain. Cremation was not always clean or controlled. Bodies may have been burned in boats, on pyres, or even inside wooden structures. The flames erased identity. What remains now are fragments, clues scattered in carbon. And yet, the burning itself was deeply sacred, a way of transforming flesh into smoke, of marking the boundary between worlds. Grave goods and everyday echoes. Even in simpler graves, Vikings rarely went alone. Men might be buried with swords, axes, or tools. Women with brooches, spindles, keys, and beads. Children with toys or small items of clothing. These were not always symbols of status. Sometimes they were functional objects the dead might need in the afterlife. Sometimes the graves show signs of feasting. Animal bones, drinking horns, and cooking pots suggest that burial was a social act, part grief, part celebration. But grave goods also reveal social divides. Some graves are rich with silver and silk. Others are bare, the dead wrapped in rough wool and buried with nothing at all. In this silence, we see the echoes of rank, of wealth, of who mattered and who was forgotten, the mystery of sacrifice. And then there are the darker findings. Some Viking graves contain multiple bodies buried at once, or in stages. Some appear to show signs of violent death, beheading, broken bones, injuries inflicted before burial. In certain ship graves, particularly those of powerful men or women, there are bodies that seem out of place, younger, unarmed, positioned strangely. Were these servants buried with their masters, wives or slaves, ritually killed? The answer is unclear. Saga texts hint at sacrifices made at funerals, those who followed their lords in death. But archaeology is cautious. Not every double grave is murder. Some may be secondary burials, added later, others accidental. Still, the possibility lingers of ritual death to accompany ritual burial, a grim kind of loyalty, preserved in bone. Horses, dogs, and animals in the grave. Animals too were buried alongside people. In some graves, we find horses, sometimes more than one, buried with harnesses, weapons, or carts. In others, dogs lie curled at their master's feet. Birds, oxen, goats, and even falcons have been discovered. These were not just companions, they were symbols, extensions of status, tools for the afterlife journey. A warrior with a horse might ride to Valhalla. A noble woman with a lapdog might show her gentility even in death. And sometimes, the animals show signs of slaughter, suggesting again that they were not old friends who died naturally, but chosen offerings for the grave. And sometimes, the animals show signs of slaughter, suggesting again that they were not old friends who died naturally, but chosen offerings for the grave. Foreign goods, faraway lives, one of the most striking things found in Viking graves. Objects from far away, silk from Central Asia, beads from the Middle East, coins from Anglo-Saxon England, and even the Islamic glassware, spices, and amber. These items remind us the Viking world was not isolated. It was connected by trade, war, marriage, and migration. Even in remote northern villages, people touched things that had traveled thousands of miles, carried by caravan or sea, paid in silver, taken by raid. These graves are not just local histories. They are whispers of a global world long before we imagined such a thing. Ship-shaped stone graves and burial mounds beyond cremations and coffins. Some Viking graves were marked symbolically, stones arranged in the shape of ships with boulders marking bow and stern. Massive mounds raised over bodies, visible for miles. Ring-shaped wooden posts carved with runes. These were statements not only for the dead, but for the living. Markers of clan, of ownership, of sacred ground, and they last. Centuries later, these shapes still rise from the earth, quiet and proud. They do not tell us everything, but they insist. Someone lived and someone mourned. A gentle reflection. Let us pause here, in the silence of the burial field. We have sifted through ash, lifted fragments of bone, read the language of ships and swords and broken brooches. The Viking world, so often thought of in terms of war and conquest, was also full of ritual, of care, of mourning. Tonight, we are not chasing myths. We are listening to what was left behind when the fire went out. In our final segment, we will rise again. We will leave the graves and walk into the halls of the Viking elite where fur cloaks, silver goblets, and courtly poetry gave shape to lives far removed from the servants who began our story. But for now, breathe. Let the hush of history cradle your thoughts. Not all Vikings lived in sard-roofed homes or rode for days across stormy seas. Some ruled. They feasted in timber halls, built high upon ridges, wrapped themselves in furs and imported silks, and drank from cups of silver while listening to poets sing tales of their greatness. This final segment offers a quiet glimpse into that upper world. A world not of labor, but of leverage. Not of hardship alone, but of choice. From the jarls and chiefs of Scandinavia to the elite merchant princes of far-flung trade towns, the Viking elite lived differently, yet they too, in time, were wrapped in linen and lowered into the earth. But first, we watched them live. Halls of wood and firelight. Imagine yourself standing before a great hall. Its wooden beams rise high above, carved with dragons and curling vines. The roof is steep, its thatch thick with the smoke of years. Long before castles in stone, the powerful ruled from places like this half-fortress, half-family seat. Inside, the fire crackles steadily. Long benches run the walls, fur-covered and lined with guests. At the center, a hearth glows, the air fragrant with roasted meat, mead, and damp wool. This is where the Jarl regional lord or chieftain holds court, not in splendid isolation, but surrounded by kin, warriors, servants, and Skalds poets who remember the deeds of ancestors and compose new verses for the present. Power here is both material and symbolic. To host a feast is to show status. To protect one's people is a duty. To be remembered in verse is the closest thing to immortality. Wealth, status, and the language of display in the Viking Age. Wealth meant more than just silver. It was about what silver it allowed. Clothing was one marker. Elite Vikings wore finely woven wool, dyed in rich colors like red, blue, and yellow. Women of rank might fasten their dresses with imported tortoise brooches, wear glass beads or amber, and carry keys that signified their role as household managers. Men displayed power through weapons, not crude tools, but finely made swords, inlaid with silver, etched with patterns, passed down through generations. Shields were brightly painted, helmets might be crested or adorned, They weighed their silver by weight, often cut into pieces. Hoards found by archaeologists contain coins from Abbasid Baghdad, Frankish Gaul, and Anglo-Saxon England. These were not just currency, they were symbols of reach. In towns like Hidibi Burka and Rib, wealth flowed through trade networks stretching from the Baltic to Byzantium, and the elite moved within it, sending sons on raids, daughters in marriage, and ships laden with goods. The power of poetry and lore among Viking elites. Words mattered as much as swords. Laws were recited by heart and preserved not in writing, but in memory. The law speaker, a respected official, held immense authority. Disputes were settled at the Thing, a public assembly that blended governance, ritual, and social gathering. And then there were the Skalds poets who performed in courts. Their verses were complex, filled with metaphor and allusion, recounting family histories, praising patrons, or preserving deeds in the rhythm of alliteration. To be a subject of a skaldic verse was a mark of high honor. Some elites sponsored poetry the way others might raise monuments. In a world where memory was power, this was the currency of legacy. The greatest leaders were not merely feared, they were remembered. Feasts, rituals, and the social fabric. Feasting was central to elite Viking life. It reinforced bonds, honored the gods, and redistributed wealth. During great feasts, guests might sit for hours, eating from communal platters of stewed meat, cheese, and bread, drinking ale, mead, or even imported wine. Songs were sung, boasts were made, oaths were spoken, and in the shadows worked servants, many of them enslaved. Many from far lands, captured in raids or purchased in markets. They lit fires, poured drinks, prepared meals, and tended livestock. Power was performative. By feeding many, a leader proved worth. By offering gifts, bracelets, cloaks, bladesy, or she demonstrated control over resources. Even religious rituals, though rarely written down, likely involved these elite households. Seasonal offerings, sacred groves, and ancestor veneration were all part of the rhythm of elite life. Women of influence. Not all power wore a beard. Elite Viking women held more authority than is often assumed. They ran large households, managed estates, arranged marriages, and guarded family alliances. The title Husfreyja, or Lady of the House, was not symbolic, it was a role of real oversight. Grave goods suggest women of rank were buried with wealth equal to, or greater than, their male peers. Some scholars even suggest priestess roles, women who oversaw rituals or wielded spiritual power. The Oseberg burial, as seen earlier, contained 2 women and a wealth of prestige objects. They may have been more than noble, perhaps, revered figures, matriarchs, or even vulvaseers or sorceresses. Their stories are still mostly hidden, but archaeology whispers of quiet command, a gentle reflection. So now we've seen the other side. From the cold floors of the servant's hut to the warm benches of the long hall, the Viking world contained many lives and many ways of living. The elite were not immune to time. Their halls rotted, their silver buried, their names forgotten by most. Yet traces linger, in ships beneath the soil, in carved stones, weathered by rain, in verse that somehow survived, and now you know a little of it, too. Imagine waking in a wooden house lined with paper and bamboo. The first light of dawn filters through the translucent walls, not with a blaze, but a soft wash of grey. A bamboo mat beneath your sleeping robe crunches slightly as you sit up. The floor is cool. The air carries a hint of smoke and dried fish. You live in Edo, the city that would one day become Tokyo. It's the 1700s. The Tokugawa shogunate rules with careful hands, and peace-long extended peace has settled over the land. But peace has its price, and today, like every day, the rules begin the moment you wake. The rhythm of the regulated everything in Edo life begins with the clock, not the mechanical kind, but the natural one. The sun determines your schedule. Temple bells, too, mark time for neighborhoods. There is no sleeping in. As the sun rises, so do the sounds of neighbors washing, children sweeping, and vendors setting up. You slip into your regulation robes. They are simple. The color, fabric, and cut are not just personal choices, they are determined by your class, your gender, and the season. Too flashy, and you may be fined. Too plain, and you're judged as slovenly. Hair is its own matter. For men, your top knot is more than style, it's a badge of order. For women, Hairstyles shift with age and marital status. A widow does not wear her hair like a maiden, nor does a merchant's daughter imitate a samurai's wife. Everything is layered with meaning, and everyone is watching. Neighborhood eyes and paper walls. Your neighbors are not just your communities, they are your monitors. The Gonengumi system, a kind of five-family unit, binds you to others. If someone breaks the law, you all answer. If one family hides a criminal, all are punished. Cooperation is survival, but so is conformity. The walls of your home are made of wood and rice paper. They are thin. Sound travels. Privacy is a privilege you do not have. The brush of feet on the floor, the hiss of boiling tea. A child's sob, everything is heard. Outside, night soil men collect the contents of chamber pots, human waste, traded for fertilizer. Vendors call out in sing-song tones. Somewhere, a samurai's sandals click softly on stone. You bow when you leave the house. Not too deep, not too casual. Each nod of the head signals status. Too low, and you seem servile. Too high, and you seem arrogant. Rice, debt, and invisible burdens, you carry your obligations like invisible weights. If you are a peasant, your labor feeds the entire nation. You grow it, but much of it never reaches your bowl. It is taxed, measured, and shipped to your domain's lords. Rice is more than food. It is currency. It is debt. It is power. If you live in the city, perhaps you buy your rice daily from the merchant stalls. The price fluctuates. You check the color, the grain, the weight. Some days, you must mix it with barley to stretch your coin. Even if you are a skilled artisan, you are bound by guilds, specialist associations that restrict trade, control pricing, and demand compliance. You are not free to work as you like. You are free to work as permitted. Politeness under pressure. The streets of Edo are busy, yet restrained. Vendors sing softly. Children run, but only in certain quarters. You walk with eyes lowered, never blocking another's way. There are signs everywhere, painted wooden boards with flowing characters, prohibitions, instructions, reminders. Don't waste water. Don't spit. Don't gamble. Don't wear foreign shoes. A samurai might pass. You must step aside. His swords, long and short, are not only weapons, they are symbols of his elevated place in the world. You are not his equal. You never pretend to be. Nightfall and quiet tension. By evening, the city quiets again. Fires are a constant threat. Houses are made of wood and straw. Each neighborhood has a fire watch. Volunteers or assigned men with lanterns and bells, scanning rooftops for smoke. You cannot go far after dark. Lanterns must be carried. Curfews are often enforced. You settle in with your family around a dim flame, eating simply grilled fish, rice, pickled vegetables. Conversation is quiet. Laughter is soft. Even your joy must be measured. You may, if you are lucky or bold, visit it or glimpse the geisha figures of elegance, trained in music and restraint. But those belong more to the floating world. A subject for another time. The long-watched night as you return home and lay once again on your mat. The paper walls return to stillness. The hum of the street fades. A bell tolls somewhere in the distance. Sleep does not always come easily. You think of debts, of your child's schooling, of next week's rice, of whether you bowed low enough to the inspector who passed this morning. And the night, like the day, is quietly watched, not by cameras or machines, but by the rhythm of the neighborhood, by rules etched invisibly into wood and skin. This is Edo, Japan. Still, refined, deeply ordered, and always aware. Let us now drift gently from the strict, everyday life of a typical Edo commoner to the quiet rebellion of a man who didn't quite fit the mold. Imagine now a figure walking through the narrow streets of Edo, his robe slightly askew, perhaps dyed a shade not entirely appropriate for his rank, his top not untidy, his sandals worn, not from duty but from wandering. This is Hiraga Janai, an eccentric, a man whose mind wandered far beyond what was permitted, and yet he lives sometimes praised, sometimes punished at the heart of this deeply ordered world. Let us follow him gently now, through the phases of his unusual life. A young samurai with restless eyes, Hiraga Janai was born in 1728 in the province of Sanuki, on the island of Sik. He was born into a low-ranking samurai family, but even in youth, he seemed to tilt sideways against expectation. As a boy, he was trained in classical Chinese learning, as was customary for samurai. He studied Confucian ethics, memorized histories, and learned the quiet language of decorum. But there was something restless in him. He did not long for the sword or even the ink brush. He longed for knowledge that was not yet sanctioned. By his 20s, he had abandoned the expected path of a provincial samurai and traveled to Nagas, of the very few ports through which foreign knowledge was allowed to trickle into Japan. There, Janaya encountered the world. Books in Dutch, European scientific instruments, ideas from distant places, ideas that were not part of the curriculum in Edo. This strange fusion of curiosity and defiance would define his life. Inventor, pharmacist, dreamer, Hiraga, Janai did not settle. He became a Rangakusha scholar of Dutch learning. He studied Western medicine, chemistry, and mineralogy. Though Japan forbade many forms of direct contact with foreigners, he wrote treatises on minerals. He conducted experiments with electricity. He built a form of electrostatic generator, a device that could give small shocks demonstrated as entertainment, or perhaps as proof of invisible forces. One could imagine Janai at night, hunched beside a table lit by oil lamp, carefully winding copper wire around glass, trying to make lightning from amber and silk. He promoted a rare clay called yakuso, which he claimed had medicinal benefits, and worked as a sort of apothecary for a time. He was not wealthy, often not respected, but in odd corners of society among actors, thinkers, and fellow iconoclasts he was known, a pen that mocked the order. But it wasn't only in science that Janai sought the edge. He also wrote plays, satirical, biting plays that poked at the rigidity of society. He took aim at bureaucracy, at false scholars, at blind adherence to tradition. He published a piece called On Farting, a humorous essay in praise of natural bodily functions, set against the artificiality of social norms. Crude, perhaps, but pointed. His wit was sharp, and sometimes it cut too close. The authorities were not amused. A dangerous curiosity in a time where thought was to be orderly. Janaya was chaotic. He dabbled in natural philosophy, what we might now call early science, but without official sanction. He challenged medical orthodoxy. He associated with kabuki actors, merchants. To live as he did was not merely strange, it was dangerous. He wore unorthodox clothes. He took on roles outside his class. Some accounts even describe him as dressing in women-esque robes, or speaking in ways not befitting his station, though these details are sparse and shadowy, emerging more from gossip than record. Still, in a society that prized correct behavior, Janice's eccentricity became increasingly unbearable. Arrest, decline, and a quiet end. Eventually, Hiraga Janai was arrested. The charges are uncertain, possibly linked to an altercation, possibly to his writings, possibly to simply being too different. He died in prison in 1779 at the age of 51. The exact cause is not entirely clear. No public mourning, no grand funerals, just the quiet end of a life lived sideways. And yet, his writings persisted. His inventions were remembered. His name, while once uttered cautiously, is now taught gently in classrooms as a figure of curiosity and invention, the gentle ripple of rebellion. Janai was not a revolutionary in the modern sense. He did not call for the end of the shogunate. He did not raise armies or banners. But in a world defined by sameness, he insisted on difference. He built, he wrote, he explored, and he paid the price for it. Yet the traces of his mind still linger, like ink faded on rice paper. In him, we see a gentle rebellion, not loud, not bloody, just different. And in the rigid quiet of Edo, perhaps that was rebellion enough. Let us now leave behind the life of Hiraga Janai with its uneasy zigzags and quiet defiance, and step softly into a world of color and suggestion. The next part of our journey lies not in the clamor of streets or the silence of prison cells, but in the deliberate strokes of woodblock prints, in the gentle grain of carved cherrywood, and in the whisper of symbolism nestled between the lines. This is the world of ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a print shop in Edo. The scent of wood shavings, rice paste, and fresh ink clings softly to the air. Stacks of prints dry on wooden racks, while an artisan leans over a block with careful, rhythmic movements. Each print tells a story, but not always the one you see at first glance. What was the floating world? Yukui depicted what was called the floating world, a term originally Buddhist in origin, used to describe the transient, illusory nature of life. But in Edo, Japan, it came to refer to something more earthly, the world of pleasure districts, theaters, tea houses, courtesans, and actors. These prints were sold like souvenirs, affordable even to commoners, and collected like fashion magazines or celebrity posters. A glimpse into a slightly forbidden world. But beneath the courtesans, painted smiles and kabuki actors' dramatic poses, something more subtle often lay hidden: symbols, codes, private jokes, warnings, sometimes even protests, because in a society so structured, even art had to whisper layers of meaning. A courtesan might be framed by a specific pattern in her kimono, perhaps, or flowing water, which told a savvy viewer about her rank, her emotional state, or even a political stance. A street scene could feature a cat perched near a shop, hinting at mischief or rebellion, depending on the placement. Sometimes, the prints used a form of parody or substitution. A famous historical figure might be visually quoted in the body of a popular actor. To the casual viewer, it was just a print, but to the informed eye, it was a subversive connection. These codes were not arbitrary. They followed known conventions. To those fluent in the language of symbols, a fan was not just a fan. A pine tree was not merely background. A heron in flight might speak of longing. A toad, transformation. And through these symbols, artists could express ideas not easily said aloud. Humor, satire, and subtle critique. Humor was central to many ukiyo prints, but it was a humor that relied on knowledge, social, visual, and contextual. An artist might poke fun at a government edict by depicting vegetables dressed as officials. A strict samurai might appear as a drunken badger, grinning beside a sake bottle. And yet, it remained gentle. A nod, not a shout. The art rarely screamed. It nudged. It invited a second glance. Much like the floating world itself, ukiyo-e was simultaneously vivid and slippery. The meanings shifted, floating dependent on who looked and what they knew. The making of a print. Let's pause for a moment here and imagine the process itself. The artist would begin with a delicate drawing in ink. From there, a team of craftsmen took over. One carved the key block delicately, removing everything but the lines. Others carved separate blocks for each color. Printers then carefully aligned or registered the blocks using nature so the layers came together with precision. The paper used was typically washi, handmade from mulberry fibers, soft yet resilient. Ink was pressed gently, not rolled, with a tool called a baron. Each print was made by hand, and no two were ever perfectly identical. It was art, born of collaboration: artists, carver, printer, publisher, each contributing their rhythm to the final harmony. Messages beneath the surface. In some prints, one can detect hints of discontent or fatigue with the rigid codes of Edo. Perhaps a courtesan stares just a little too directly at the viewer. Perhaps a kabuki actor's pose recalls a band play. These moments were rarely accidents. During times of strict censorship, especially under the tempo reforms of the 1840s, when the government cracked down on luxury and entertainment, artists became especially inventive. Prints became quieter, more coded. Sometimes they were burned, banned, or altered. But always, the message found its way softly into the world. One famous print shows Mount Fuji in the background, tiny and serene, while in the foreground, a man struggles under a heavy load. The balance of beauty and burden, a whisper about life in Edo, hidden in plain sight. The quiet echo of the floating world today. Ukiyo-e is displayed in museums, admired for its composition and color, but once it was part of daily life, hung on walls, passed among friends, collected and enjoyed. Even now, if you look closely, you can hear the quiet messages echoing between the brushstrokes, the laughter behind the masks, the coded longing beneath the surface. It was beauty, it was art, but it was also survival expression within limitation, and like the floating world itself, it has drifted gently into memory. Let us now leave behind the bustling print shops and gentle symbolism of the floating world and pass through the polished gates of a different life, one of status, of lineage, and of paperwork. You may imagine the samurai as sword-bearing warriors, leaping into battle, banners fluttering in the wind, and once, perhaps, they were just that. But by the Edo period, after centuries of internal warfare had given way to peace, the samurai had become something else entirely. They had become administrators, record keepers, monitors of rice shipments, quiet custodians of social order. This is the paradox of the samurai in Edo, Japan. Elite and idle, revered yet redundant. Let's explore what that life actually looked like. A life of rank, ritual, and routine. Imagine you are a mid-level samurai in a modest domain, one of many across the archipelago. You live in a wooden compound within the castle town. Tatami mats line the floors. Sliding doors divide your sparse rooms. Outside, a quiet garden softens the edges of duty. You rise early, not to train for battle but to bow, to log rice taxes, or to check on deliveries of ink and paper. Your days are filled with routine, supervising construction, inspecting tools, drafting reports for your sword hangs at your waist, but it is ceremonial now, more a symbol than a weapon. This is not a life of blood and steel. It is a life of hierarchy and dust. Paperwork as power. Edo, Japan was an intensely bureaucratic society. Orders were issued in careful script, sealed with red stamps. Records were kept of everything from marriages to livestock counts, to the precise number of bundles a farmer owed in rice. And the samurai, those once feared warriors, became the hands that wrote it all down. Some, of course, resented it. Others adjusted. In many domains, samurai were divided into ranks: those who held land and salaries, and those who lived in the domain lord's castle as stipended officials. Their duties were defined not by valor but by their proximity to administration. You might be assigned to the tax office, or to temple oversight, or to supervising bridge maintenance. Promotions came not from glory in battle, but from loyalty and literacy. Power had shifted from the sword to the scroll. Idleness and its discontents. But not all samurai had duties, and even those who did often found themselves with long stretches of idle time. This idleness could weigh heavily. In some towns, samurai played Go for hours. Others studied poetry or the Chinese classics. Some turned to drink. A few joined secret societies or plotted rebellions, but these were rare and usually doomed. A great many simply waited for a summons, waited for an assignment, waited for a purpose that would never come. They polished their armor. They maintained their swords, but they did not use them. The stipend system, rice as salary. The entire samurai class was supported through a system of stipends usually paid in rice. Each samurai received an annual allotment based on rank and loyalty. This rice was often converted into cash through official merchants, but its value and the cost of living, especially in castle towns like Edo, could quickly outpace income. Debt was common. Some samurai pawned heirlooms. Others took on side work under assumed names, teaching, translating, even writing plays or selling artwork. It was a quiet erosion of identity. You were samurai, but you were also broke. Still, appearances had to be kept. Your family wore the correct clothing. You maintained your hairstyle. You walked with your swords visible even if you could not afford a proper meal that evening. The pressure of form over substance was immense. Culture and constraint. Yet the samurai class also contributed deeply to the cultural life of the Edo period. Many became scholars, preserving and interpreting historical texts. Others wrote poetry or practiced calligraphy. Some supported no theater or helped codify martial arts as discipline rather than combat. Even their uniforms, layers of linen and silk, carefully folded and tied, became expressions of restraint and dignity. Their lives were shaped by a slow rhythm. Nothing happened quickly. Everything had its proper form. Even suffering wore a calm face. The art of doing nothing in time. This stillness took on its own philosophy. Sejuku, tranquility, mushi no mind. The cultivation of self through stillness. In this, the idle samurai was not entirely without purpose. He was expected to observe, to reflect, to remain ready, not for a fight but for a summons, a ceremony, a shift in duty. He waited not as a failure, but as a stone might wait beside a path. Still, silent, enduring, gentle fade of a warrior class. By the late Edo period, the contradictions of the samurai life had become too heavy to sustain. Many domains were in debt. Stipends were slashed. Samurai began marrying into merchant families. The once clear boundaries blurred. With the arrival of the modern age in the mid-19th century, the samurai system would dissolve almost completely. But in the stillness of their fading world, we glimpsed something strangely beautiful. A society held together, not by battles, but by rituals, paper, posture, and quiet endurance. It was a life built on watching and waiting, on silent walls and sharp silhouettes. on the art not of doing but of being. Now, as we near the end of our journey through Edo, Japan, let us gently turn from the echo of swords to the softness of paper walls. From rice taxes to rippling silk, it begins before sunrise, not with philosophy, not with democracy, with the sound of chisels clinking against stone. Imagine you are a laborer in 5th century BCE. You are not a citizen, and certainly not a statesman. You are a skilled worker, barefoot, dusty, and already sore from yesterday. You have been hired, or perhaps compelled, to work on one of the greatest construction projects the world will ever know. The Parthenon, the Temple of Athena, the pride of Pericles. But none of that matters to your hands, because your hands are already raw. The quarries of Mount Pentelicus, before the gleaming marble reaches the Acropolis, it must be pried loose from the hills. And so, your day may begin at Pentelicus, a mountain north of the city, stripped in places of its white stone. It is beautiful in the distance, but up close, it is a place of dust and deafening sound. You use iron tools, wedges, hammers, levers, cokes, massive blocks from the mountainside. There are no power tools, no gloves, no goggles, just stone and sweat. Your sandals wear thin against the sharp ground if you are fortunate enough to have them, and the dust clings. It gets into your hair, your ears, your throat. By midday, your skin is pale with it, but you cannot slow. The overseer walks among you, frowning. Time, after all, is political. The long haul to the city, once a block is free, it must be moved slowly, carefully, with ropes, rollers, sledges. You help steer oxen down the winding roads toward Athens. You must avoid tilting, shifting, or losing the load. There are no paved roads here, just rutted paths, and all the while the sun climbs higher. You wipe your brow with your forearm. Behind you, the mountain fades. Ahead, the columns rise. The Parthenon is taking shape, and you are one small cog in its vast machine. Chaos on the Acropolis. Reaching the construction site doesn't bring rest. It brings more noise. The Acropolis is alive with movement. Workers shout over each other in dialects from every corner of Greece. Some are locals. Some are metics, foreigners permitted to live in Athens but not to vote. Some are enslaved. Architects pace, gesturing with wax tablets. Sculptors measure in carpenters erect scaffolding. Stonecutters crouch in the dust. And everywhere pulley ropes, chisels, sawdust, the occasional crash of a dropped tool. Your orders are barked at you, sometimes in Doric, sometimes in Ionic, always fast. You are told to lift here, push there, to grind a corner smooth, to hold a weight steady. No part of the temple is standard. Every column is subtly different, every joint hand measured. The architects are obsessed with Rasha's mathematical perfection, but perfection is heavy, and you are the one lifting it. The sound of labor, the noise becomes its own rhythm. Taff, 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 a pause. Then the harder strike of a heavier mallet. A groan as the ropes tighten and a block shifts into place. Someone yells, not in anger, just urgency. But your heart skips anyway. There is no safety net. If a pulley slips or a stone shifts, it can crush a leg or worse. And if you fall from the scaffolding, there is no physician to rush in. The gods may take pity, or not. You keep your balance. You stay quiet. You keep working. Bread, olives, silence. Midday brings a brief pause. You sit, not in shade, but at least still. Your lunch is simple barley bread, an olive or two, and maybe some onions. No meat, no wine. You chew slowly, watching the dust rise from the quarry trail. No one speaks much. Your body aches. Your shoulders burn. But there is more to do. Always more. A temple for the gods, and for politics. The Parthenon is a holy project, but it is also political. Pericles, the leader of Athens, uses this grand building to show the city's power, to outshine Sparta, to proclaim that Athens and Athena ruled the Aegean. You hear his name often. Pericles wants this done well and quickly, but Pericles is not here. You are. And while he debates in the agora, you are chiseling flutes into columns, each groove just so each mistake permanent. Nightfall and ash when the sun lowers. Shadows stretch across the scaffolding. The sight slowly quiets. You return home or to your small shared room, if you're lucky enough to live nearby. You wash your hands in cold water, the dust forming little rivers down your arms. You eat more bread. Your muscles tremble as you lie down. You hear the sound of stone in your dreams, always stone. Always wait, and at dawn, it begins again. This is why you wouldn't last a day building the Parthenon, because it wasn't made by gods. It was made by tired hands, and they were never really thanked. The sun no longer rises just for it now glimpsed off polished bronze helmets, draped robes, and the polished floors of the Athenian assembly, where before we walked among the laborers and dust, we now step quietly into the echoing footsteps of a man whose name still clings to this marble age, a name inseparable from classical Athens, though his life like the Parthenon was never as smooth as it appeared. Let us take our time with him. Imagine, as we begin, a man who seems serene on the surface, but constantly treads political fire beneath. A quiet but powerful beginning. Pericles was born into privilege. His father, Xantippos, had fought at Mycalea naval victory during the Persian Wars. His mother, Agariste, came from the powerful Alcmaeonid family. Influential, established, ambitious. As a young man, Pericles was quiet. Contemporaries described him as calm, reserved, sometimes even cold. His voice, they said, was deliberate. His dress, always dignified. His calmness earned him the nickname the Olympian. But Olympians, as myths remind us, are rarely without storm. Learning from the best, philosophers and rhetoricians, Pericles wasn't just born into politics. He studied for it. He was taught by the finest minds of his age. He may have listened to Zeno of Elea, the paradox man, who taught that motion itself might be an illusion. From Anaxagoras, he learned a kind of reasoned detachment, a way to study the world without fear of superstition. He took to rhetoric, public speaking, not with fire, but with precision. He did not shout, he did not flatter. Instead, he spoke clearly, measuredly, always with structure. His words built arguments the way stones were set on the Acropolis, rising to power. Athenian politics and strategy. By his 30s, Pericles was one of the most influential figures in Athens. He became strategos, or general, year after year, a role that combined military leadership with public policy influence. And he used that role, gently but consistently, to shape Athens into something new. He expanded democracy not just in name, but in practice. He proposed paying jurors for their time, allowing even the poor to participate in the courts. He commissioned grand building projects, not just the Parthenon, but temples, stoas, fortifications. He wanted Athens to be not only strong, but beautiful. To its allies, this looked like leadership. To its rivals, it looked like empire. The Delian League, tribute and tension. Originally formed to protect against future Persian invasions, the Delian League began as a mutual defense alliance among Greek cities, but under Pericles, the League's treasury, once housed on the sacred island of Delos, was moved to Athens. From there, tributes from allies funded warships and marble. Athens used this wealth not just to defend Greece, but to adorn itself, to build, to shine. To some Athenians, this was glory. To others, particularly in other cities, it was theft by another name. But Pericles did not waver. He believed in Athenian greatness, and more than that, he believed in making it last. The Peloponnesian War begins, but Athens had another rival, Sparta, and Sparta did not admire columns. It admired spears. By 431 BCE, tensions simmering for years boiled over into open conflict. The Peloponnesian War had begun. Pericles, cautious by nature, chose a defensive strategy. He ordered Athenians to retreat behind their long walls. "Let Sparta come," he said. The city would outlast them. Food came in from the sea. The people crowded within. And then, the plague. Plague in the walls. No one saw it coming. A fever, a cough, an ache in the limbs, a shiver even in the heat. Crowded together, Athenians had no room to flee. The disease spread like spilled wine across a table. Pericles, too, watched helplessly. His sons fell ill. Then his sister, then Pericles himself. He survived the first wave, but not unchanged. He aged quickly. He lost family, friends, faith in Athens, unity, and a year or so later, the fever returned. This time, he did not survive. The quiet legacy: Pericles died in 429 BCE, not in battle, not in disgrace, but surrounded by a city he had tried to build into eternity. His policies had strengthened democracy and also strained the peace. He left behind monuments of stone, but also cracks between cities, within Athens itself. Some remembered him as a tyrant in disguise, others as the greatest Athenian to ever live. But history does not whisper in agreement. It simply lets the marble speak for itself. And so ends the chapter of the man who commissioned the Parthenon, but never saw its completion. From here, we will turn our gaze downward beneath the city he shaped, beneath the columns, beneath the ruins, to the secrets and soil of Athens itself. Beneath every perfect column lies a hidden crack, beneath every statue's smile, a trace of mortar and labor, and beneath the polished stones of Athens, something old awaits. While poets sang of reason and freedom, the earth quietly recorded a messier version. Let us go down, step by step, softly into the subsoil of the city. Imagine the cool hush of a museum, the hush of ancient things uncovered after sleeping for centuries. Dust clings to air, light is filtered through mesh and canvas. Here, archaeology tells the truth that marble forgot. A city built on a city. Athens has never been just one city. Like many ancient places, it grew in layers, one generation building on the ruins of another, like stacking memory upon memory. Archaeologists, with their brushes and patience, have uncovered wells filled with discarded pottery, children's toys, ritual offerings, shattered plates, and animal bones. Not the treasures of kings, but the ordinary lives of thousands. Some of the oldest finds Mycenaean tombs. Bronze Age shards lie beneath the Acropolis itself. And so, as the builders of the Parthenon hammered stone above, they worked atop the bones of the past, often without knowing it. Waste, water, and what it tells us, you might imagine an ancient city's glory through its temples, but its truth often lies in the sewers. Athens had a rudimentary drainage system. Clay pipes, stone-lined ditches, even reused amphitheater carried runoff and waste from houses and streets. Excavations of wells and cisterns have turned up surprising remains, some of them somber. Infant bones, thrown away, possibly exposed, possibly buried in haste. It is a reminder. Classical Athens was not immune to hardship, nor free of sorrow. Even in a city that celebrated reason, inequality and desperation lived side by side with philosophy. Construction debris and scavenged stone imagine wandering through the Agorotha public square some 2,400 years ago. Buildings rise neatly around you, columns align in pleasant rows, but underneath, things weren't always so planned. Archaeologists have found reused blocks in unexpected places. A carved frieze flipped and mortared sideways into a later wall. Inscribed stones buried under steps. Athens was beautiful, yes, but also practical. Stones were repurposed, walls patched, nothing wasted. Even the Parthenon itself, as pristine as it seems, has evidence of reworked plans, mid-construction corrections, subtle signs of compromise. Beneath the vision of perfection, there was always the rhythm of adaptation. The dig beneath the Acropolis Museum today. If you visit the Acropolis Museum, you will find yourself walking above Athens itself. The museum was deliberately built with glass floors in parts, allowing visitors to look down on the archaeological site below where an entire neighborhood once stood. There are houses there, workshops, wells, courtyards, ovens, still blackened with soot. It was not a ceremonial space, but a domestic one. Some rooms have been preserved with faint mosaics, others with grinding stones or broken terracotta plumbing, each telling a story not of greatness, but of daily life. In the shade of the Acropolis, people cooked, argued, washed their hands, sang lullabies, pottery shoods and broken dreams. If marble was the symbol of glory, pottery was the symbol of daily survival. And so much of what we know about Athens comes from broken pots, discarded shoods. A citizen could scratch a name into a piece of pottery, and if enough agreed, that person would be exiled from the city for 10 years. Even democracy had sharp edges. Elsewhere, pots tell softer stories. Amphitheater used for wine and oil. Storage jars etched with family marks. Drinking cups painted with laughter, music, and myth. Their fragments, though humble, outlived the philosophies of their time. The forgotten people beneath the philosophers. Athens was a city of thinkers, but it was also a city of servants, slaves, migrants, and craftsmen. The ruins reveal this gently. In one site near the Keramakos, ancient gravestones, some of them fallen on citizen saws, simple inscriptions and symbols. A pair of sandals, a thread spool, a carved olive branch. They remind us that the city was more than its orators and generals. Most Athenians were not at the symposia. They were working, raising children, enduring heat and debt and illness, and their lives, buried carefully or carelessly, now re-emerged softly under layers of soil and silence. From foundations to fragility as you listen now, think of Athens not as stone, but as sediment, ideas, rituals, and rules, packed tight over time. What we see today, the white columns, the high pediments, just the uppermost crust. Beneath that, the city was alive, messy, cracked, and patched and repatched. Its foundations, like its citizens, were never entirely stable, and yet that's what makes them human. And in their humanity, ordinary, flawed, and persistent, we find something strangely restful. Let us now lift our gaze once more to the places those forgotten Athenians never entered, to where oil lamps flickered, laughter rose over wine, and power spoke softly, but firmly. Now, let the stone dust of the workshops fade from your imagination. Let the quarried marble rest where it was laid, and the flickering lamplights shift softly inward. It is evening in classical Athens. The air is warm, still, and heavy with the scent of roasted herbs and wine. You are no longer among builders and laborers. You are entering the private world of the elite. This is the symposium, not a lecture hall, but a dinner party, with rules. The ritual of reclining first. You remove your sandals. You do not sit, oh no. You recline on a couch called a klin, draped in cushions, one elbow propped just so. Your position, your literal position in the room where you lie, says something about who you are. The host takes the most prominent spot near the andron's center. Close friends arrange themselves accordingly. Foreigners or lesser status guests are placed further from the center of attention. It is a world of invisible signals, a coded choreography of respect, class, and camaraderie. Food for form, not feast the food. Light, symbolic. A few olives, a handful of chickpeas, grilled fish if the host is generous, fruits, nuts, and perhaps a honeyed cake. This is not a meal for nourishment. This is a performance. Conversation is the main course. Wit, insight, clever barbs exchanged with polished ease. The host watches, and so do others. Say too much, and you'll be noted for arrogance. Say too little, and you may not be invited again. It is a space of ease and anxiety, both wine and water. And who pours now comes the wine, but it is never served pure. A crater wide and shallow is brought out, and water is mixed in. To drink unmixed wine, that is barbaric. To mix it too lightly, childish. The balance matters like everything else. A symposiarch is appointed something like a party referee who decides the ratio of wine to water, the order of songs, the tone of the evening. Sometimes they choose seriousness, philosophical discussion, even debate. Other nights, the air grows looser, songs, riddles, games, but never chaos. That would be shameful. Even drunkenness in Athens was a kind of theater, not a surrender. Performances in shadowed rooms, entertainment often arrived in the form of music or recitation. A hired aulos player performing with two reed flutes that once might fill the space with sharp, buzzing melodies. There might be recitations of Homer, not just the words, but the cadence, the breath, the memory of war long past. Some symposia featured playful performances, impersonations, dramatic monologues, or brief plays delivered for laughter or admiration. Always, though, the underlying structure remained: roles, status, applause measured and appropriate. Even pleasure was a performance of discipline. Women in absence. And where were the women? Respectable Athenian women were never present. The wives of the guests remained at home, managing households, unseen. The only women in the symposium might be hired entertainers, educated courtesans who sang, debated, and sometimes offered companionship. But even they had roles, scripts, expectations. Athens was, in its own way, a city of walls and thresholds, and the symposium, though informal in appearance, was another kind of gate. Philosophy between sips. Some symposia became the setting for deeper reflection. You may recall the work of Plato. His dialogue Symposium is among the most famous. In it, philosophers recline and debate the nature of love. What kind of love leads to truth? What is beauty? What is virtue? These were not idle topics. For Athenians, to drink wine while speaking of the soul was not contradiction, it was ritual. And yet, how sincere were these dialogues? That, too, is unclear. As with so much in Athenian life, sincerity and performance blurred. The quiet end of the night, the symposium fades slowly, like a candle burning down to the stub. By now, the wine is thin, the voices softer. A few guests drift into sleep where they lie. Others rise and slip away quietly, sandals whispering on stone floors. Outside, the city is asleep. Builders rest aching limbs. Children dream of gods and goats and games. The temples, dark and silent, watch over all. Within the Andron, only the last drops remain wine, words, and the ever-present awareness that life in Athens was never truly private. Even pleasure had rules. Drawing the curtains on classical Athens as we close this final chapter of the night, think not only of the sharp lines of Doric columns, or the speeches of generals and thinkers, but of soft lamps flickering in tiled rooms, of quiet footsteps past neighbors' doors, of the quiet exhaustion of stonecutters and slaves, of performances shared, secrets spoken, debts owed, and laughter offered. Athens, in its light and shadow, was brilliant, but never easy. And if you were to live a day within it, whether as builder or philosopher, you would surely feel the weight of its order and the comfort of sleep when the day was done.